Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And well, the conflict is raging and I am very curious to see how things will develop, especially on the Triglavian side. Of course, we know that they're now sort of harvesting or manipulating one of the stars in the first system that has been conquered, and also on the new Edencom side. Will they have like big fortresses? What are they planning to do? Yeah, just generally, I'm really curious to see how this story will evolve. We'll need a little bit of patience for that, of course. A lot of this stuff is probably still in development, as we can now see that CCP has brought the first new ships for Edencom to CC. So if you want to take a first look at that, you can definitely do it. I will try to as soon as I find some time on that. It looks pretty damn interesting. Of course, we also have that chain lightning type weapon that should be up for testing as well, and there should be a mass test coming next week. So overall, we might get back into a little bit of testing, and I'm really curious to see how these ships will work. There's already some worries about it in PvP, but I, of course, as a Care Bear, am really curious to see how they'll work out in PvE. So new ships always welcome, and definitely looking forward to that as well. Next up, let's take a quick look at the new Eden store and see what's happening here. We've got some bundles happening. And then we have the Eden Hunter skins, which we saw last time. Really like the Basilisk one, and actually the Drekavac as well, which I bought the first Drekavac, still need to fit it, and definitely a ship that I need to test out as well, although it's a battlecruiser, so it's not really that great for exploration. And then over here, of course, we have the Kuipernaut Clade skins that look really awesome in the Triglavian colors. So if you are supporters of either side, you can definitely make that known by using these skins, and I think that they look absolutely amazing. On top of that, you have them as well for something like the Nestor, the Leshak, and the Vindicator. Definitely ships that you could see in these systems. Especially the Nestor, I think, is still pretty doable in price, I mean, this, gotta say, it does look pretty damn cool. And whenever they're moving, they also have like a special effect that was super visible here on the Guardian. So lots of really cool skins with the current conflict, so that is actually pretty nice. I think this is a good idea, a good use of skins when it comes to EVE in general. And then we'll of course, as a contract has just been assigned to me, we will move on to the market here, and as always, we'll start with some plex and stuff, and that's coming in at 3 minutes. Like that. Okay, let's get started here for plex in Jita. 2,640,000 disc, 2.5 million for the first buyers, so those have been forced up a little bit. In the player owned trade hubs, very close to that, just above 2.6 million, and the buyers hardly go up from this, so there is now heavy competition between Jita and the Tranquility Trade Tower, where both of them are basically trying to get a hold of the market again. Jita has this advantage, of course, that through the mobile app you can now trade in Jita itself, which is completely being remodeled. It's going to become a huge station, also something, of course, to look forward to. But you can see here that after a sale which drove the price back down at the towards the 2.5 million range on the chart, we're now basically flat, slightly up, of course, having to recover from that sale, but we are pretty low on the charts, and to me it does look like the right time to be looking into investments in this current category. Plex itself, I have a decent amount of Plex that I already hold. I don't want to put all my assets in this, but yeah, just look at this chart. Eventually, I do think that we will form a real bottom, and 2.5 million, I think the market's not really willing to go too much below that. Once you see prices below that, I think demand suddenly surges up and that people just snag them up as soon as they can, because it does feel like that's a pretty damn low number. On the other hand, must also be said that ISK generation in Nozick has been nerfed substantially. ISK value has gone up as a result, but overall I still believe that inflation is the inevitable force when it comes to ISK in EVE Online, and so this ought to be a good jumping point for a little bit of plex. On the multiple pilot train certificate front, we have pretty much the same thing. We went as low as 1.25 billion, had a little bit of a jump up and then a bit of a downwards move as well, probably timing with the sale and the influence of Plex itself on this one. But you could say that we are pretty flat at the 1.3 billion mark. Just above that for the sellers, just below that for the buyers. So the margin is closing as well, which I think is quite often a sign. It's not an assurance, but a sign that the market is definitely converging on a bottom, and that from there we could still move either way, but it's more likely that we'll start to slowly move up rather than down. Next up, we have the skill extractor. Of course, very similar chart, but actually did go below 300 million ISK on a couple of days, and we're still below that. 294 million for the sellers, 290 million for the buyers. Again, witness the closing of the margin of 4 million, less than that in fact, between sellers and buyers. 4 million margin on something that costs 290 million is definitely not a large margin. So here again, I'm feeling like just below 300 million is going to be bottom forming. Once we get above that, I don't think we'll go below that again, unless CCP of course comes out with even more sales and things like that. After that, we've got the large scale injectors that are still struggling, managed to do a little bit of a comeback heading towards 750 million, but in the last couple of days we're actually going back down. Well, CCP is still being very generous with skill points with the daily logins. 733 million for the sellers, 705 million for the buyers. Again, really narrow margin here. And must be a little bit of dumping, I think, that caused the pullback here in the price, but we are staying below 750, and this does again look pretty juicy, which brings us to the small scale injectors that are now slowly moving back up on the 150 range. And well, I can't really show that here. That's true, because I'm making the market orders on my main character, but this is, I bought the first small scale injector as an investment for the longer term. It's now selling for 148 to 150 million for most, and 140.7 million for the buyers. This is actually, compared to all of the others, still a wider margin, which in my opinion means that you still have a chance to really grab some cheaper small scale injectors as close as possible to 140 million ISK. And if you try to generate that on the chart, you can clearly see that you are trading, buying below the entire chart by quite a little bit. On everything else in this category so far, the margin has closed substantially, and let's get it like that. The margin has closed substantially, and so here, well, you can buy still pretty cheaply below the most of the chart, but you can't really try to get into some real sales when it comes to putting up a buy order here. You basically might as well buy Plex for 2.6 million because those buyers at 2.5, that difference is not really that big anymore, especially on like the skill extractors, right? You could put up a buy order for 290, but might as well pony up 294 in my opinion in order to grab that. The difference is just so small. The one that's left is the small scale injectors. That one still has a pretty healthy 8 million almost, yeah, actually more than that on most of these sell orders. Margin here, which gives you a little bit of room to try and buy below the entire chart, which to me always feels like that's almost a no-brainer. This should give me a nice return on the medium to longer term. After that, we have the daily alpha injectors continuing to struggle as well, staying between 30 and 40 million. Right now 32.5 million for the first seller, 30 million for the buyers. That is almost 3 million margin, especially if you look at most of the sellers here. That's still like a 10%. That still feels like a more normal margin than some of the other ones that have closed substantially. So here again showing that this is a different item, a slightly different market as well, and it behaves a lot more independently than let's say the pilot train certificates, large scale injectors, Plex, skill extractors, and things like that. Those have that Plex correlation that does tend to move in sync, and especially when you're seeing the the margin close in plex, it tends to close the margins on everything else. While the daily alpha injectors, they can do their own thing a little bit more, which is actually pretty impressive. It is its own market only for alpha clones, and right now it is also pretty damn cheap. But I would rather go into the small scale injectors that have a larger market to trade into than the daily alpha injectors personally. And then finally we've got the hypercores that are staying below 300,000 discs. Sellers are coming in at 297 for most, 285,000 for some sellers in the Tranquility Trade Tower, and then 245,000 for the buyers. That again is a much healthier margin between sellers and buyers, at least creating some sort of opportunity if you have any interest in buying hypercores. Also showing that in my opinion the Hypernet relay is not taking over sales or anything like that in EVE Online. Activity doesn't seem to be too high. Also, we're not really noticing any big jumps or anything like that when CCP dropped the fee for the Hypernet Relay for a couple of days. So I think it's got its niche, it's got its uses for raffles and things like that. It is actually pretty useful, I think, especially in larger alliances when you want to give out prizes in order to, you know, just help out your alliance mates and things like that. That it has its uses there, but you know, a real front and center gambling mechanic or a massive market that has an influence on the sandbox economy, it stays rather limited from that. So far no complaints for me personally when it comes to the Hypernet Relay. I also personally don't use it. Let's move on to the mineral markets coming in at 11.15. Here, as always, we'll start with Tritanium. That has to give back a little bit of ground, but it's really trying hard to stay above 8 ISK. In the last couple of days, the average price has actually dipped below that. We're now at, if we go for JITA, just a while ago it was 810. That's still what I'm using for the ticker, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, people are closing the gap here very quickly towards 8 ISK for the sellers, 760 for the buyers. And so the great times, I would say, are over 9 ISK and above is an incredible price. 8 ISK is still a really good price for Tritanium, don't get me wrong, but once you get into the 7s, you're more in an above average but still in a normal range for Tritanium as well. You can see that even last year we managed to get up to 7 ISK for Tritanium. So 8 ISK is quite okay, but here I would definitely not recommend dumping everything that you've got anymore. Perhaps even holding some stocks for later might start to be useful, especially once we dip below 8 ISK here, like 7.99 for this seller. At some point, I personally do think that we will start to see regular variations in the market come back here with swings that will sometimes get us back well above 8 ISK. If a large alliance in Nullsec suddenly has a big building program that needs a little bit of Tritanium, well, they're definitely gonna buy everything below 8 ISK, and they might just push for like 811, 810, something like that, to grab this billion units here as units of Tritanium here as well. And that is when you might actually get a better price for the stuff that you're producing now. So start to be a little bit wary of just selling everything, and you might want to keep some powder dry to strike at better times. I think we'll start to see that here. Pyrite might just be a little bit of an example of that, might just be entirely by accident, or something else could be going on. But look at the volume increase, all of a sudden double the price, and we shot up towards 8 ISK again. Sellers are up to 794, 758 for the buyers. This is a small opportunity to sell your pyrite at a slightly better price. And for now, we do see that Tritanium and pyrite have been behaving differently in the last 3 months, but I personally do feel like both of them are coming into that balanced region where these types of events can be happening. Tritanium went up to 10 ISK, and here we have to give that some time to be absorbed by the market. That's not sustainable for a very long time, but once we play with prices below 8, I think it's going to happen. For pyrite, 794 to 758, the closer to 8 the better, and you can see that we have this slight variation that has been happening here in the last couple of months already. On the Mexalon front, different story, of course. We're above 90 ISK for the sellers, 91 almost for the sellers, 78.3 for the buyers. Pretty wide margin. I would say sell your Mexalon right now, of course. Very pronounced 1-year high point, and this is not something that I would hold back on. This is completely different from Tritanium that has pulled back. Here, you can fully expect, in my opinion, just as Tritanium went up to 10 and then pulled back to 8, that Mexalon just went up to 90, but will settle perhaps at like a 70-75 range or something like that. So here, yeah, I wouldn't hold anything back. Any Mexalon I make go straight to the market. Here we get Isogen, a surprise jump up here as well. Very impressive. In fact, 26 ISK for the sellers, 23 ISK for the buyers, where we were staying at around 20 for the last couple of months. Very likely reason for this, I mean, this is a little bit speculation on me, but people probably noticed something in the new ships and weapons that are coming, that there might be some Isogen involved in there. Let me know in the comments if that is correct, but that would be my first thought here. That we'll see like a little bit more usage in Isogen, and thus that has driven the price up by about a quarter, 25%, something like that. Pretty impressive, and this is why you want to keep some of your powder dry, of course. During this period, I would never have said, I think, that it was as great an opportunity, a very pronounced 1-year high opportunity, maybe right at the start here, but that means you've had several months of not selling all of your Isogen. You know, it's definitely different from this here, and it just happened right now that Isogen shot up, probably due to something that CCP released on CC, creating a nice opportunity to sell for 25% more than you could have just a couple of weeks ago, couple of months ago. Yeah, pretty nice here to see these different states. Basically, during the resource drought, things become more expensive, but that doesn't mean that you just have to dump everything all the time. And here you can clearly see all of these different phases where you had this hesitation and then a slight uptick. Tritanium is now pulling back, so here, you know, start to keep some of that. Mexalon went up to a high point, it's actually still here, but you can expect to pull back very soon. And then Isogen with a surprise spike all of a sudden, also an unexpected sell opportunity, which I would take advantage of, or maybe do a 50-50, because who knows, the impact may be greater than we expect when things actually become clear, or they may be smaller, and then selling would be the right idea, of course. After that, we still have the Noxium market that is continuing to stay in the 300 to 350 range here, 330 for the sellers and 300 ISK for the buyers. Obviously here I would still also be willing to sell, but not necessarily dump everything either. Our former Nozic minerals that are back to Nozic minerals, here is Zydrine, went up above 1000 ISK, doesn't seem to be that sustainable. Sellers are still there, but the buyers are down to 950 ISK, opening up a little bit of a gap here. Very pronounced 1-year high point as well. So if you have Zydrine to sell, I think it is the time to try and do so. And then Megasite is actually already pulling back from the 600 range. Very weird to see how Zydrine managed to go up like 40%, up to 1000 ISK, and Megasite just reaches 600 and already pulls back quite severely. 570 for the sellers, 473. Look at that margin between sellers and buyers. This definitely, to me, indicates sell your Zydrine now, because that gap, I don't think is very maintainable, and the most likely thing to happen is that Zydrine, in my opinion, will pull back. And then finally we've got Morphite that is now going back down to less than 15,000 ISK, 16,000 for the sellers and 13,300 for the buyers. And this is probably due to the Edencom sites, where once Edencom takes over, there's actually an opportunity for neutral to Edencom aligned players to mine there, to mine those Triglavian resources. And we saw that there's actually Morphite coming from there, so that we've got extra resources, extra sources of Morphite coming online, which is driving the price back down. It is still a great price. Historically speaking, I would say buy Morphite for less than 10k and then sell at the right opportunity. 15, 17, 18k, things like that are definitely possible, but they're not patterns that happen very often. So you do need patience and you do need to strike at the right time for that. So that's the minerals. Let's move on to PI, coming in at 1855. Let's see if the story is different. Unfortunately, I don't see any signs that it should be. Here is, for instance, the broadcast node market. You can clearly see the difference between the amount of sellers and the amount of buyers. And that gap, 1762 for the sellers, 1761. I think this is basically a very bad move on the sellers front because you're just paying more taxes than selling directly to those buyers. But okay. Look at this decline here. We're clearly trading well below average at the moment, and with data points close to that 175 million, we're actually getting pretty close to a one-year low point on a complete lack of demand. So if for the longer term you want to get in on something, yeah, I'd say broadcast nodes do look pretty juicy. Buy them below 1.8 million. And I do think you've got a good long-term investment, but it always feels very risky considering this one-year chart is basically very flat between that 175 and that 2 million range for most of the time. Let's see if it is confirmed on some of the others. Here is construction blocks. The chart definitely seems to confirm an oversupply situation right here, going back towards 8,000 disc here, 9,200 for the sellers, 7,563 for the first buyer. That is really, really low, and they're probably succeeding in grabbing, considering the average price, in grabbing some of these construction blocks, which is very cheap, of course. Normal average 10,500 disc or something like that for construction blocks. So here again, we're clearly seeing signs that despite the fact that we're seeing a decent amount of buyers this time, the margin is so large that you could almost classify all of these as very opportunistic and really trying to be set for the future. After that, we've got our consumer electronics that did a surprise rush back up to 11,000 disc, which I would still consider below average actually for construction blocks. 12,500 has actually been more of a price that we've seen in construction blocks and consumer electronics, and we already see the sharp pullback. 10,500 for the sellers, just straight 500 and more down there, and buyers 8,700 opening up this wide margin again between sellers and buyers. Clearly again trading well below average. Very sharp pullback. Any opportunity like this will get snuffed out with huge amounts of supply that the market just can't absorb at the moment. Coolants going straight to a one-year low point, less than 10,000 for the sellers, 6,800 for the buyers. Yeah, this is again a really wide margin, showing that lack of demand. Look at how much you can browse, and this is just in JITA, by the way. And here the buyers, yeah, I mean 6,700, and then we go to 3,000 disc. Those are of course the crazy buy orders that sometimes accidentally grab something as well, but another show that right now PI is struggling, and this is really a trend break. For coolants, for instance, tied to fuels, it did really well for a while and managed to maintain that 11k to 12,000 range for quite a little bit, but now here it does seem to be breaking, so I would say, yeah, buy below 7,000 disc. Probably not that bad of a jumping point for some coolants. Now I produce these myself, so I'll just be hoarding them at this point, but it does seem to be something that is across the board right now for PI. Crop Protectant Solutions, which had a very strong couple of months since basically December here with the introduction of all of these new implants. Now right back to that 100,000 disc, 105 for the sellers, 93,000 for the buyers, and look again at the lack of demand compared to the supply. Enriched uranium confirming the trend, definitely going to 10,000 disc, one-year low point as well. Buyers are below that at 9,600, and then integrity response drones also breaking down, one-year low point going straight through the 2 million and no signs of stopping. Less than 1.9 million for the first seller. Most of them are just below 2 million, but 1.85 million for the buyers, and that's it. In JITA and the Tranquility Trade Tower, we have 6 buy orders, including one that's for 0.1 ISK, which is kind of crazy, of course. Probably won't ever trigger anything, but we basically have 4 buy orders that are at least somewhat of a reasonable price. So here again, showing that, well, PI is really struggling, but this potentially could be a very nice jumping point to start some of your investments, I'd say. Mechanical parts also struggling, going back down to less than 10,000 disk, less than 10,000 for the sellers, 9,500, not as pronounced, so I wouldn't be moving on mechanical parts when I could be moving on coolants, when I could be moving on enriched uranium and things like that. But it is clearly confirming the trend. Organic mortar applicators right through the 900,000 again, 920 for the sellers, 811,000 for the buyers, something we've not seen in a very long time, I think. Another one that you could definitely consider. Robotics is actually holding on to that 85k, which is actually pretty low already. Normal average price is 100,000 disk here, so almost 20% down. 87,000 for the sellers, 84,000 for the buyers. Self-harmonizing power cores, poor advanced PI materials, down to 1.5 million almost. 1.6 for the sellers, above 1.5 for the buyers. But this again, really you're buying below the entire chart. Superconductors are holding on to 10,000 disk, but clearly the sell opportunity is gone as well. 11,300, that's actually still okay for the sellers. 10,340 for the buyers, and considering the average price here in the last couple of days, I'm gonna say people are just dumping whatever they can, and this will start to drag sellers down as well. Test cultures moving back below 7,500. Look at the lack of demand here. 5,000 disk. That's it. That is like a 50% margin between sellers and buyers. That's crazy. But yeah, if you can grab them, why the hell not? Wetware mainframes also again confirming that advanced PI material problem or trend by going to less than 1.9 million. Yep. First sellers in fact at 1.8. Buyers coming in at 1.8 as well. Very interesting in my opinion to see this crash down now. Summer is coming, this could get exacerbated, but it is very pronounced in some of them, especially the advanced PI materials that are showing very pronounced one-year low points. Now, again, don't put all your eggs in one basket, don't spend all your ISK and start buying PI like crazy, but I think some really pointed investments here will pay off in the longer term. Especially my theory is still that it is very likely that the Triglavians will become the fifth race, will have territory here and will have to build up massively, and that could become a very intense source of industry in general, which could require a lot of PI. So for me, that would be my theory, my lookout, my horizon would be very long if I were to make PI investments at this point. I would not be buying now hoping to get a profit by the end of the summer or something like that. This is really something for the very long term, but then I'm seeing lots of opportunities here because yeah, some of these charts are kind of crazy, and some of these buy prices, I mean 5,000 disk for the sculptures, considering that we were going for 15,000 disk here just a couple of months ago. That is kind of crazy. Demand is gone, and this could be the right time to get in on some of that PI sale that's happening basically. All right, let's move on to advanced move materials coming in at 2720. Let's go. Crystalline carbonite is getting back below 150, so I'd say slightly below average. 148 for the sellers, 143 for the buyers. It is definitely being oversupplied a little bit as well, but it's not as bad as the PI market so far. Ferrite carbides trying to get back to 140, I'm gonna say. Yeah, 143 for the sellers, 141 for the buyers. Again, pretty narrow margin despite the fact that we're probably slightly oversupplied and trading right around the average. That's still doing quite okay. Titanium carbide is continuing to decline. All right, for the first time in a year, sellers below 150, buyers are still at 146, so I still think it's maybe a little bit too early to say that it's the right time to buy, but this is a one-year low point in titanium carbide. I wouldn't blame you if you try to grab some below 150. Tungsten carbide is actually the one exception, staying above 200 disk here, 210 for the sellers, 197 for the buyers. Bit of margin opening up here, but we're also the only carbide type material that is trading above its average at more than 200 disk. On the metamaterials front, we have photonic metamaterials that is also starting to struggle, right? Starting to show some signs of going back below average. at less than 16,000 for the first sellers and 15,600 for the buyers. That is clearly happening, but also pretty narrow margins, so we're not seeing a complete drop off or the bottom fall out of these markets either. Plasmonic metamaterials are dropping substantially all of a sudden, but it's relative. 20,000 disc is where we start to defend, I think. Yeah, 20,000 for the sellers, 17,000 for the buyers. Well, considering the price difference here, this might actually just be a little bit of a correction, bring stuff in line. I'm not too panicked just yet. Non-linear metamaterials also doing the same thing, dropping off to less than 20,000 disc on the chart. 19,500 for the sellers, 18,000 for the buyers, but this again is relative to the others. Might still just be a correction, bringing everything in line a little bit more. And then Terra Earth's metamaterials, very same pattern here again. 20,500 for the sellers, 18,000 for the buyers. There's a margin opening up, but considering this entire market chain, I basically think that we are converging on a price point for all of them, and it's not just yet a sign that demand is gone and that we are going to crash prices to one-year low points just yet. For the other materials, we get fermion and condensates. That does seem to be a little bit oversupplied. What are the sellers doing? 78,000, 69,000 for the buyers, less than 70k. 70k on the chart is right here. This does look a little bit better. If you want to make a advanced move materials investment, try to grab these for 70,000 disc, and then you've got something that's below the entire chart. Ferrogel I thought was doing okay, yeah, staying above 40k. I mean, where we start off the year, it's still a pretty big loss, but 40,000 for the sellers, 38,500 for the buyers. Basically, pretty narrow margin, and this seems to be the new normal for Ferrogel. Fullerite is doing surprisingly well with some volatility on top of that. 1,550, almost 1,600 for the sellers, 1,240 for the buyers. This is actually a very strong performance. Not bad, something to definitely sell and try to bring to the market. Hypersynaptic fibers are then not doing too well, but trying to get back to 11k, 11,230 to 11,400 for the sellers, 10,000 for the buyers. I mean, it's not great, but it's not the right time to jump in either, I don't think. Nano transistors holding on to 6,000 disc. That's pretty decent, I would say. Phenolic composites trying to get on that 2,000 train, but 1993 for the first sellers and then 1883 for the next one. So here, yeah, we are below 2,000 disc, but the margins are not that bad. I'm not that worried just yet. And then ceramic fibers staying at around 350, and again, yeah, 355 for the sellers, 330 for the buyers. There is still some demand, some competition here. We're clearly struggling a little bit, but it is completely different from the PI situation where we are lacking completely in demand. We're definitely making one-year lows here. It still feels like there's a bit of normalization happening, and sure, some of them are struggling, but nothing is pointing to a complete problem of oversupply in advanced move materials just yet, but it might mean good sales in Tech 2 ships. So we'll move on to that segment at 32.5. Which as you might know from one of my previous videos, I've started investing in some stealth bombers, just because I thought some of those were really low. I think 22 million, 23 million is where I managed to buy quite a few of them actually. So here is the Ares, went below 25 million last week. I said, yeah, that might be the right time to buy. In fact, I think I bought two of them. Not really sure of the price, so I will have to make like different videos when it comes to my active trading, because if I don't put them in these folders, but I'm gonna try to use the market orders and then especially the orders history tab to show the successful trade. I think that's gonna be a lot easier to do and to follow. So won't be a part of the segment in Eve Talk anymore, but right now 23 million for the buyers. I think I bought for 22, and sellers are up to 27 million already. Now, does this rally have legs? It might not, but clearly we have formed another one of these bottoms below 25 million, and the market is moving up from that. Basilisk as Logi stayed at 230 for quite a little bit and is now breaking back down. I think as people have found their methods in the new content, Logi might have gone down a little bit in importance. Right now 198 million for the sellers, 185 million for the buyers. Get rid of these two buyers and I'm probably moving in on a Basilisk as well, perhaps even with a decently aggressive price. Yeah, that's something to look out for. Perhaps it'll happen, perhaps it won't. For me, that's what I would personally wait on, is to get rid of these two buy orders and then to try and jump in. After that, we get the Cerberus, does go down, but from 280 to 230, that is not really bottom prices just yet. 229 million for the sellers, 200 million for the buyers. Historically, you guys know that I tend to jump in on the SERP at like 185. Things like that have been possible. The Crow is continuing a slow descent, a little bit annoying when it comes to the chart, but we're now touching 25 million, which we actually have not done before on the 5-day moving average. 26 million for the sellers, 23 million less than that for the buyers. I would say if you missed the Aries opportunity, right now you still have potentially a Crow purchase that is below the entire chart. That could be worth it. After that, we get the Guardian. Yeah, I think here it is a combination of the Logi importance with all of the new content, and then also with this one. Let's see if I can find it. Skins. Where is the Kybernaut skin? Don't think I'm gonna find it right here. But yeah, I think it's an amazing looking skin. The animation that was right here on the front of the ship just looked really crazy. I think it brought a lot of people, whoops, and made a little bit of a mistake. Where, oh, there's the window. Aha, that's what I did. I docked it with the EVE University tab, and now I'm completely messing up. Sorry about that, guys. Like that, and then that's not it. Did I just lose the chat channel? Yeah, so I'll have to remake that one later. Should have just pinned that stuff. But okay. Well, we'll continue like this. Sorry about the mess up, guys. Can happen. But yeah, I think here the Guardian spiked up to 300 million ISK, 220 now for the sellers, 213 for the buyers. And the reason is going to be because it has all of a sudden also got an amazing skin. It is an armor Logi, and so the Triglavian side had basically no choice but to go all in on the Guardian and then to look cool doing it as well. I think basically that's what happened. Oh, and now I docked this one right here. I see what happened. Let's see if I can fix this by moving you down. Okay, let's try it. Put it here. A little bit smaller, a little bit larger, and there we go. I'll try to pin it as well. That should be this one fixed, and then we can go back here. Okay, so the Guardian is pulling back, but it is nowhere near buyers below 200 million, so definitely too early to sell. Very impressive spike, of course. Could have sold some of these at 300 million ISK. You are definitely making some ISK on that. Then here the Hawk is continuing to stay pretty low at 35 million, but the question is where are the buyers at. 36 million for the sellers, 31.5 million pretty much for the buyers. I would say that that is too early to move on as well. Heretic, yeah, struggling at around 60 million. Here, this is interesting. 53 million though for that average price. So 61 million for the sellers. Look at supply in Jita. Supply with the trade hubs. It's not that great. But look at the demand, it's completely non-existent. Now, for reference, I grabbed one of these when we were completely oversupplied as well for 52 million. So that would again be my go-to range. I want to try to buy a next one if I did below 52 million. There's still two buy orders at 53, which I think might still be good investments, but we know that we can buy lower. So I would try to wait for these to get filled and move when they're gone. But this is crazy, of course. No availability and no demand. Poor interdictors, they are kind of struggling at the moment. Next up, here is the Hound. We're already moving back above 25 million, and I think I bought 4 of them for like 22 million or something like that. 25.4 million for the sellers, 21.6 for the buyers. You can still try to get in on the trade, but a little bit of a bottom has already, in my opinion, formed. Where we go from here, that's always difficult to say, but I basically made my move here on the hound purchase, or try to. The Ishtar is showing a little bit of volatility. It's trying to stay in the 230 to 250 range, but not really succeeding apparently. 220 for the first seller, 223 for the buyers, but 200 million, 208 for one then. So, okay, kind of weird to see this volatility come back all of a sudden. You can definitely buy them very cheaply, and some sellers coming in, including 50 here at 223. It's gonna put some pressure on the Ishtar market right now. We're probably trading a little bit below average. It's for you to decide. Do you think that buying one below 210 million or just above 200 million would make a lot of sense for an investment? It definitely could. It's also a decently large market for a heavy assault cruiser. It's got its PvE usage as well, so there might just be some sustained demand here. All of a sudden this drop off is a little bit weird, so a slight opportunity in this sharp, sure, if you want to gamble it. After that, we've got the Manticore that's also making its way back above 30 million, 32 for the sellers, 27 million for the buyers. Don't think I made a move on a Manticore, not really a pronounced one-year low point. The Munin is also moving back down. Let's see if we have the same pattern here. Yeah, we do. 230 now for the sellers, so we get some more sellers coming in. Buyers 211 for one, and then 205 for the next one. Same thing in my opinion as with the Ishtar. I would never gamble on more than one of these ships then if I would try to buy them, but it makes sense. Buying for 210, buying for 205, looking at this chart does make sense. Selling for 250, selling Ishtars for 230, 240, maybe even 250 is a possibility. It's 25% profit, could definitely be worth it. But yeah, volumes, again here the Ishtar, at least we get 100 a day. The Munin sometimes has really bad days, so it's a bit more risky, I think, than some of the others, like the Nemesis, which went down below 25 million. Also made a move on that one right now. 28.5 for the sellers, 22.8, almost 23 million for the buyers. So clearly another small bottom that has formed. It was the right time, I think, to move on these, which is what I did if you saw the previous video. The Oneros is also edging back down. I think here again pretty normal. Couple of months here above 200 million. Just if you are in need of logistics cruiser for the new content, might as well grab a couple of Neros as well. And now we're trading selling below 200 million. Demand is dropping off, going down to 171. You could risk this again as well, but the volumes here are really terrible, not my choice. And then the Purifier, I think the Purifier is one where I only managed to grab 2 out of the 4 that I wanted to buy. Not sure what the price was anymore, but also the biggest turnaround, 32 million for the sellers, 25 million already for the buyers. And I think mine went for these. Yep, it's 2 of them. So I think that I did manage to grab 2 of them for 23 though, so I could already try and sell this at a profit. Next up here we get the Saber, and this is interesting. I also bought a Saber. I'm not sure of the price anymore, but this is a complete trend break, 1-year low point, very pronounced. 59 million for the sellers, 56 million for the buyers. And I think 56 million for the buyers is actually something that we've seen throughout a lot of this, but now you have a realistic chance to actually buy them at this price. And why is this happening? Complete oversupply on decently low trade volumes. So basically, if you remember with the Heretic, it happened here as well. We went up to 90 million. We saw supply. We were completely oversupplied, and at some point I managed to grab one for 52 million. Now if I show that on the chart, that's definitely below pretty much everything. And now the exact same thing is happening right now with the Saber. Despite the fact that we're not really coming right off of this peak of 72.5, we're just seeing way too much supply here. Sellers are forced to go below 60 million, and so buyers at 56 will probably be able to grab those cheap Sabers as well. Now, won't go too crazy with the volumes. Keep that warning in mind whenever you're trading in the Tech 2 ship market, but this really is a very pronounced 1-year low point. If you want to potentially have that really cheap Saber, I would try to grab it right now. And after that we get the Scimitar. same story as with all the logistics here, in my opinion. Went up to 250, new activity, we need some extra logistics. That is starting to die down. 220 for the sellers and just below 200 million for the buyers. Back to that, maybe in slightly below average range. And then the Zarmast, well, it's still a Triglavian cruiser, so a little bit newer ship, managing to stay well above 300 million. In fact, 400 for the sellers, 320 for the buyers. So the Take-Two ship market, I think I timed the bomber purchase at the right time. We'll need to wait, of course, a little bit for sell opportunities. And I'm still seeing now the Ares is down, but the Crow could be in the right spot. And then for those that really want those investments, look at some of the larger ships here at the moment. We were talking Ishtar with buyers at 208. We're talking Munin with buyers at 211. Potentially even below that. And then of course the Saber that has this very crazy chart that tells you that you can buy one for very cheap right now. Let's move on to the Tech 3 market then, coming in at 44.20. And let's grab a bit of water. So we can continue, and let's see what's happening here. Last week I felt like we were starting to normalize towards that 40 million again for a tactical destroyer. Let's see if that trend is confirmed. Here is the Confessor, 5-day moving average, actually going pretty much through that 40 million. 40 million for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers. Availability, nothing too crazy in the last 24 hours. 58.23 is maybe a little bit much, but this feels like the normal range and like we are normalizing in the volumes as well. So that one is a good sign, I'd say. Hecate trying to land on 40 million, but actually stalling before that. 44 million for the sellers, 40 million for the buyers. Last 24 hours, nothing too crazy. Slightly higher availability in the volumes here on the Hecate, which makes sense. It is still slightly more expensive, so you get slightly better margins. Then we get the Jackdaw, also staying above 40 million. 43 for the sellers, 39.5 for the buyers. And here again, last 24 hours, a little bit. 4 sell orders, but we still have that 120, 70 and 34. So I think that this is going to slowly drive the price towards 40 million as well. And then we get this Vapel that's actually down to 35 million at this point on average, 35 for the sellers and 31 million for the buyers. And availability here is finally declining. So if you'd want to make a purchase right now, I would say, yeah, Zwepel as close as possible to 31 million will, in my opinion, make sense, because we're not seeing the crazy volumes. I think all of this crazy volatility has finally been absorbed by the market. We're seeing a little bit of a more careful industry that is finally going back to a more logical situation where you get the bigger volumes on the ships with the higher prices. This ought to continue, and this should relieve this Vapel a little bit when it comes to more supply. That should eventually drive those buyers back up. That is my theory. They're still, look at that in the last 24 hours. If this stops, right? If this stops, then those buyers will be forced back up, and you'll have a nice sell opportunity. So right now, it's the last thing that doesn't make sense is that in the last 24 hours, we basically have more sell orders of Zwepels than all the other destroyers combined. But the volumes here make a lot of sense. Production will switch to that, and then we have this nice wide gap still of 5 million is between sellers and buyers. 31 million for a Zwepel, and I think this will stop. There we will see more supply driven to the better priced destroyers, and as a result we should get this this nice opportunity in this Zwepel. I think it is possible, so we'll see in the upcoming weeks, of course, if I'm right on that. But on my next trip, I may just try to grab his Vapel as close as possible to 31 million, maybe like 3 of them, spend 100 million, and hope for like 10-20% profit on those. But finally, in my opinion, we're back in that 40 million range. You're seeing some volumes in the Confessor, but nothing crazy. Better price, higher volumes. Jackdaw, better price, higher volumes as well. Feels a bit more normal, feels like this market may finally come back into its more predictable range, which is why I liked it so much. Let's move on to the cruisers. Here is the Legion dropping back off. That's not so good because I did buy a Legion myself for like 130, I think. 140 million for the sellers, 126.5 for the buyers. So here, again, in my opinion, you're buying below 130, very cheap on the Legion. If you haven't done so yet, you have an opportunity to buy a very cheap hull there. But I don't really like to make predictions here because this feels like a market that is just so small that it can very easily be manipulated. After that, we've got the Loki that is stalling at the 180 million range. In fact, fresh supply, look at that, in the last 24 hours, more than a full page, driving the price back down to 173. Buyers are below 150. What would we be waiting for? Honestly, yeah, 140 below that is where it starts to be interesting. So I say still too early for a move on the Loki. Proteus is also going back down. Here we need to be below 130 for the buyers. All right, we're there. 148 for the sellers as well. And then the Tango actually moved back up a little bit, going for 169 million and 150 for the buyers. Okay, if you want to, Legion makes sense. We're definitely buying below the charts. Proteus might make some sense as well, but keep one thing in mind. I'm not a big fan of this because I feel like this market is crazy unpredictable. And as a result, I personally did do one gamble with the Legion because of its potential going up to like 190 million ISK would be nice, but I don't count on it. I really consider this more a gamble than a trade, something that I don't normally do. Compared to the Zwepel idea here, I think it makes a lot more sense. It's far more realistic. So my preference would go out to trading in the destroyers, but there is no doubt, of course, that if the gamble works out, the potential profits in these are very high. I just don't have an explanation why you would have like the Loki, a price that's at 180, which is really not that great, and then you see all of these sell orders come in the last 24 hours, driving the price down with almost 10 million ISK, and those buyers are at that 1 year low point. Why does all of this supply come in when the prices just doesn't make sense? So it's just the cruiser market is a crazy one. I think there is manipulation in there, and it feels very risky to make moves, especially big moves in there. So 1 or 2 ships, that's basically the most that I'm personally willing to hold in the Tech 3 cruiser market until maybe they come back in the meta, maybe CCP changes something or something like that. It's a weird one, basically. That leaves us for the extra product this week, and I'm going for the faction cruisers coming in at 5110. Like that. And so let's take a look at this faction cruisers. We'll start, maybe we'll quickly do the precursor faction here first. Let's see what the Rodiva is doing. And isn't that the logistics? What are its bonuses? Remote armor reps, yep, exactly. That's a logistics cruiser going for, it feels like it's a slightly below average price at the moment. 70 million for the sellers, 60 million for the buyers. And then we've got the Vedmak, that's actually pretty low at the moment, considering this full 1 year chart. 88 million for the first seller, less than 80 million for the buyers. I think part of the reason why I like to keep an eye on the Triglavians is because I want to see if indeed CCP is making them very available, allowing them to become mainstream. All of that could be a sign towards that theory that I have, that eventually we'll have the 5th race, which will be the Triglavians. After that, we've got our faction cruisers. We'll start with the pirate factions. Let's see what these are doing. Ashimu going back down towards 50 million, which is pretty low at the moment. 56 for the sellers, less than 50 million for the buyers. Definitely inexpensive, also not that great in volumes, so I'd be careful, but you could try to grab an Ashimu for less than 50. Then we've got a Cinnaball that is going for 130 million ISK, around there. 135 for the sellers, 123 for the buyers. We're not seeing a lot of buyers, so here again, buying one for less than 125. Let's try and get that on the charts. is probably here. Yeah, probably at this line right here. You could try it. It feels like it is pretty cheap and lacking demand. The Ortrus is doing a lot better, selling for 222 to 225. Buyers are above 200 million ISK. That is definitely an above average price. Now we've got the Phantasm, that's actually at the 1 year high point, 110 million for the sellers, 94 million for the buyers. Very impressive here, 1 year high point, great time to sell Phantasms if you can. The Stradios is also doing really well, going for 200 million ISK here, 175 for the buyers. Gila is actually, as a response, crashing back down. Okay, very interesting. Where are those buyers? How close to 170 are they? Then it could start to get really into 158. All right, 183 for the sellers of the Gila, 159 for the buyers. Not for a short-term trade, but you're buying below the entire chart. It would make sense to grab at least one or two of them. Very difficult to explain why the Phantasm's going up like that. Ortrus doing well, Stradios is doing well, and then the Gila, usually considered to be the king of the PvE platforms, is going down and is buying for less than 160. If you ever wanted to get a Gila platform, by the way, this is definitely the time to at least get the hull, even if you can't fly it yet. Then we've got the Vigilant, staying pretty expensive at 190, 171 for the buyers. So very interesting to see a difference in behavior in these pirate faction ships. Incredible opportunity in my opinion in the Gila, and then some expensive ones as well, like the Ortrus, Phantasm and Stradios, that are going for quite a bit of ISK at the moment. After that we get our Navy faction ships. Let's see what's happening over here. Augurer Navy issue is trading a little bit above average, but not by that much, actually just pulling back. 63 million for the sellers and less than 50 million for the buyers. And then the opposite faction, Caracal Navy issue, is also above average, actually decently expensive right now. 69 million for the sellers, 59 million for the buyers. Pretty wide margin opening up here as well. Executor Navy issue is expensive. I'm actually going to go through this a little bit more quickly because Omen Navy issue is expensive as well. Osprey Navy issue is actually at a 1 year high point, going for 67 million right now. Actually sold one of these as well at a nice profit. Sight Navy issue going back down, but are selling for 55 million, still definitely above average. Stabber Fleet issue flat at that 50 million range, and then the Vexor Navy issue actually finally coming back a little bit as well. Something that I actually want to test out for exploration as well now, that Vexor Navy issue. Now it's no longer a drone boat, but it still has a drone damage, and then maybe with the right hybrid turrets we could, especially with the tracking speed, make that into an interesting different exploration platform, but also definitely trading above average, selling for almost 57 million on most sellers. So the trend here seems to be that with the lower LP payout for PvE activities in faction warfare, we not only have lost this wavy predictable motion where one faction would win out, have a lot of LP, get to very inexpensive ships because they're so affordable, and then the opposite faction would of course be struggling with generating LP, and those items would become very expensive. Right now across the board, I think with more LP being generated from PvP activities, you actually see that we are struggling to keep up and everything is becoming more expensive. This is the first time where I think this is finally happening. It could be that it took just this time, this amount of time to get through a lot of the LP stocks that were still out there, but that seems to be the trend here now in this faction cruiser market, the Navy faction cruisers at least. All of them are above average, rather expensive at the moment, and there is a lot less of a difference between winning factions and losing factions at the moment. It is kind of a loss in one sense. On the other hand, of course, all your PvP rewards get a lot more rewarded because of that as well. So it's that's the nature of the sandbox, guys. When things change, sandbox adapts. There are some winners, some losers, but it is almost never all winners and all losers. That's how it works, and this is of course part of why I absolutely love this game. And there we go, guys. That's it for this EVE Talk. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.